Good morning everyone and welcome to another edition of On the Whistle. Hope you're all doing well. Hope you're still all absolutely buzzing after Saturday and one of the great days of Sunderland DID. Not just to win at Wembley, but to bring an end to that sort of a journey after our previous relegation from the Premier League, and to do it that way as well really is just the most incredible sort of couple of weeks of football, really, when you think about an 88th minute winner in the first leg, 126th minute winner in the second leg, and then 95th minute winner in the final. Just a remarkable sort of sequence of games and of moments, and something that we'll never ever forget. Thank you to everyone who's watched my video diary from the Wembley weekend. If you haven't seen that, it's there's a video. The last video on the channel is just me sort of recording my journey through the Wembley weekend, really. So you can still watch that if you haven't seen it. But I thought it would be good to just have a bit more of a normal On the Whistle, if you like, in the days aftermath. Chat a little bit about the game and the occasion, and also take a look at some of your questions, because I know a lot of you have mentioned about some of the transfer news. It's already started, it never stops, and a few other different bits and bobs. So yeah, we'll have a look at those questions and have a bit of a discussion around that later. But I think the game itself was one that it probably just summed up not just how good Sunderland have been this season in terms of the mentality and the resilience of the squad, but particularly, I think, in the playoff campaign. And it's been really interesting, because I feel as if a lot of the discourse that I picked up from sort of neutrals and pundits is that Sunderland have been a little bit lucky in this playoffs, and that maybe haven't played particularly well and have just kind of taken their moments. And I think it's a little bit harsh. I'm not quite sure it tells the story of the game. And thinking back when you've got a little bit more distance on Saturday's game, listen, I think everybody can kind of see that Sunderland had a real wobble at the start of the game. Sheffield United, like, to their credit, I thought they started really powerfully. They put a very aggressive press in place. I thought Sidi Peck was really impressive in the early exchanges in midfield. They kind of stopped Sunderland playing out, and they caused a lot of problems that way. And for sure, every time that you know Gus Harmer got on the ball and drifted in field, like, you felt like something was going to happen. And that was obviously a brilliant save from Anthony Patterson in the first couple of minutes to stop Sheffield United taking the lead. I think that the Luke O'Nien injury at the time, it felt to me like it really disrupted Sunderland in terms of not just the general makeup of the side. We know what a sort of influential leader O'Nien is in this team, but he's also the player that generally Sunderland look to start the build-up of their attacks. And I think the combination of losing O'Nien, who has such an important role in that, and the sort of ferocity of the Sheffield United press early on, I think meant that they really struggled to sort of get a foothold in the game. But I think that it sort of changed. Clearly, the crucial moment in the game is the disallowed goal, because I think that if that is allowed to stand and Sheffield United go 2-0 up, I think it's really, really difficult for Sunderland to get back into the game by that point. It's strange though, because I felt that the momentum of the game had shifted slightly at that point, whereby I think that, as he always does, you know, Labrie stayed quite calm. He's very focused. He's very much focusing on the little details. And I thought his decision to switch Ballard and Mepham was a sort of a very, very subtle one, but it was a little bit of an inspired one, because I think that Ballard probably has a little bit more intensity, a little bit more confidence than Chris Mepham driving out with the ball. And I felt that by the time that goal was disallowed, Sunderland had started to get into the game a little bit. I didn't really feel like Sheffield United were completely on top. Sheffield United were comfortable, for sure. Sunderland weren't creating much. But I think that the balance of the game had switched a little bit. And then clearly, of course, what happens when that goal is disallowed by VAR, it gives Sunderland a massive lift. I felt that we'd moved beyond the point in the game where Sheffield United looked like they were going to score regularly, where it looked like Sunderland were under all sorts of pressure. I think what we then got was a question mark over Sunderland, whether they would have the quality on the ball to make something happen to get back in the game. And that was obviously the sort of pattern of the game that continued into the second half. And you know, I think that ultimately, if you look back at it, yes, the state of the game plays a part, because Sheffield United don't have to chase the game, they don't have to create loads of chances. But actually, Anthony Patterson didn't make loads and loads of saves. One of the things Chris Wilder talked about in his press conference after the game, which I absolutely agreed with, is how kind of sloppy his team were in transition. And I thought that was right, because there were opportunities for Sheffield United counter, but they didn't create a great deal with it. Yes, Anthony Patterson makes that huge save from Brooks, and of course then Dan Ballard makes a brilliant block after that. Again, massive moment in the game where Sunderland conceded, it's game over. But that really was a Sunderland defensive error and not dealing with a long ball. It wasn't a brilliant bit of play from Sheffield United. I think as Harmer's influence started to wane, and obviously he then gets injured and has to go off with, I think it was about 20 minutes to play at the time. as his influence started to wane, I think that Sheffield United lost a lot of their threat. Again, I think the question mark was whether Sunderland were going to produce something to score. That was obviously the big question mark because, let's be fair, they weren't testing Michael Cooper. He had very, very little to do in the Sheffield United goal. Lebris, again, I think his, ability to fix things within the game so impressive. I mentioned that little tweak in the first half where he moved Ballard across that I thought defensively and defensively made a bit of difference for Sunderland. And the way he managed the Roberts situation paid off handsomely, really, didn't it, in terms of, we now know a few days on the extent of which Roberts had, suffered a nasty calf injury in that second leg, had barely trained in the game, and bringing him off the bench rather than asking him to start again proved to be a massive stroke, really, because he brought a real injection of energy and drive when Sunderland needed it, and caused Sheffield United a lot of problems and really pushed them back, and then it's a brilliant move for Meander's goal, a fantastic finish from Meander. And I thought after that Sunderland finished the game on top. And again, yes, they weren't creating loads and loads of chances. Michael Cooper's not making save after save. But I thought Sheffield United looked like they were tiring. I felt that again, as happened in the extra time in the first leg, and the second leg of the semi-final, I thought that Sunderland were the team in the ascendancy. So I do, I think it's one of those where looking back on the game, like Sunderland had everything went Sunderland's way. Not trying to dispute that at all. If you look at the injuries to Harmer, the fact that Sunderland scored when Sheffield United had 10 on the pitch because Amadozic had obviously had that head injury and had to go off the pitch. The VAR decision, yeah, it's one of those magical days where everything went in Sunderland's favour, but I do think there's maybe the level of performance that Sunderland have produced over the playoffs, in my opinion, hasn't really got the respect and the credit it deserves, because it's not just about having possession, it's about what you do with it. Said it at the time, that first leg against Coventry, when everyone expected Coventry to win at home because of how strong they'd been at home and all the goals they were scoring, they barely created a chance in that game. And after Sunderland went 2-1 up, there was still quite a bit of time to play with the stoppage time and what have you, and they created very, very little. Sunderland really limited them. So I do think that Sunderland's resilience, their organisation, their structure, and their ability to finish the game strongly is something that hasn't got the credit it deserves over the course of these playoffs. And yeah, there was a lot of luck in the win, everything went Sunderland's way, but I think that there was also a lot of good stuff in the performance after that initial wobble. And I think to hang in there, to sort of get through that moment of difficulty, to get through losing one of your most influential players, both in terms of his leadership and sort of the way you set up tactically, I think it's something that deserves a huge amount of respect. And listen, it doesn't really matter whether Sunderland played well or not anyway, does it? It was just an absolutely incredible afternoon. One of the most special things you'll ever witness, those limbs in the end. And again, I think it's spoken a little bit about before, but I think that the fact that Tommy Watson scores that goal, again, it's a huge credit to Lebris, really. So Tommy Watson, for digging in during what, young lad, what would have been a really difficult period for him after he was getting, some stick after the move to Brighton was announced. But for Lebris to be so calm in the way he managed that situation, always saying that we might need Watson, knowing, with Romain Mundle's injury situation, that he could still have a part of play, that he could, go on and deliver for Sunderland. I think, again, it just sums up how level-headed, pragmatic, intelligent Lebris is in the way he manages this club, and I think he deserves a huge amount of credit for that. So let's have a look at some of your questions, some of them around the game, some of them around Sunderland's promotion, more generally, and what comes next. So the first thing from here is from Bestie1967, who says, do you think that without the backup of VAR, would the assistant have ruled the Sheffield's second goal out? Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because it is something that I feel like you see when Premier League referees come down and manage Championship games without VAR. I sometimes feel like VAR has become a little bit of a safety blanket for them, and you feel like sometimes maybe they can get into some difficulties managing Championship games when they don't have that technology there. Listen, I personally thought that I don't like VAR when I watch it on the telly. I think the game's better without it, to be honest, in terms of the stoppages, which we've talked about some of the time wasting in the Championship this season. I think that there are too many stoppages in the game, and I think it's ruining the product, really. But I have to say that, obviously I'm more likely to say this wants someone to win, but I thought the process ran pretty well on Saturday, to be honest. It was fairly quickly communicated that there was a VAR check going on. There wasn't a huge amount of time before the referee was asked to go over the monitor. He didn't take ages and ages over the decision. He then came on the pitch and explained his logic. And ultimately, I think it's the right decision. Like Chris Wilder said in his post-match press conference, that he doesn't think Anthony Patterson gets there, whether or not Vinicius Sousa's in the way, he's entitled to that opinion, but we'll never know for sure, and that's the entire point. We'll never know for sure because Vinicius Sousa is there, and he's clearly in Anthony Patterson's eye line when the shot is taken. So for me, it was the right decision that was made. I can totally understand why Sheffield United feel aggrieved, because there is every chance that in a normal league game that goal does get allowed. And I can understand that when you play 48 games without VAR and then VAR makes a big decision against you in such an important game with everything on the line, that's incredibly frustrating. I would never criticise that reaction. For me, it's the right decision because we can debate whether Anthony Patterson would get there, but that's not the point. Sousa is clearly interfering by being in his eye line when the shot is taken from an offside position, and he doesn't need to be there either. So for me, I did think it was the right decision. Clearly a huge turning point in the game, but I think that was probably a rare example of VAR working quite well in terms of, for me, the right decision being arrived at in an important game. Not particularly a fan of VAR generally, and I suspect when we do those videos next year, we'll have lots of gripes about it, but I don't think that particular incident was one that you could sort of use to criticise VAR from. So here's one from Chris who says, do you think it was Regis's rotation policy at the end of the regular season that we finished all 3 playoff games looking the fitter, stronger side, and was therefore a major factor in our promotion to the Premier League? Well, I think one thing for sure, Chris, we can say is that, if ever Sunderland are in this position again, we'll be talking an awful lot less about momentum, because I think what these 3 games did do was absolutely vindicate Lebris's approach, was that it was more important to have a fit squad, a fresh squad, than to have a squad that had come into the playoffs having won a few games. I think that was incredibly obvious that the absolute bedrock of this promotion, this successful playoff campaign, was Sunderland having the vast majority of their best players available and able to play in their proper positions. The return of Dennis Sirkin, the return obviously of Dan Bard, who was absolutely immense across all 3 games. I think it's clear that Lebris did the right thing in being careful with these players. If you look across, for example, and as I said at the start of this video, I thought Sunderland finished the game much the stronger than Sheffield United, much the stronger. Yes, not creating loads of chances, but I thought they were clearly the team in the ascendancy and who physically looked stronger. And if you look at the key players on the pitch at that time, Jobe Bellingham, Enzo Lefebvre, Tommy Watson, obviously, who we've talked about, these are in a lot of cases players whose minutes were really carefully managed towards the end of the season. In Watson's case, for example, playing quite a lot so he could get back up to match fitness from injury, even though it was affecting Sunderland's play because he was clearly struggling for match fitness. Enzo Lefebvre, Sunderland were desperate for him at times in those last few games of the season in terms of the impact he would have made, but Lebris didn't want to risk another injury and you wanted to gently get him back up to speed. So I think that, again, Bellingham, who would have made an impact but missed a couple of games with a little ankle problem. So I think that Regis's rotation policy did prove to be a factor, because I think that you're absolutely right to point out that Sunderland ended up finishing the ties as stronger, and it definitely goes to prove that momentum probably isn't the most important thing coming to the playoffs. So yeah, it's been really, really interesting to watch that evolve. And as I say, I think Regis's squad management and his ability to stay calm even when the results dipped it towards the end of the season has been a big factor in the success. So we've got a question here from Rob who says, is Jobe's exit mutually agreed? So yeah, I think obviously this is a very, very fast developing one, and things may have changed even by the time that you watch this video. But Jobe Bellingham is, reported by Sky Sports Germany to have been in Frankfurt yesterday, meeting with Eintracht Frankfurt. We also know there's significant transfer interest from Borussia Dortmund and also from RB Leipzig. Nothing has been agreed yet in terms of, certainly not club to club. It's clear that Bellingham has sort of taken some time to see what decision he wants to make. So we'll sort of see how that develops over the next week or so. I think that in terms of Sunderland's perspective with Jobe Bellingham, I think mutually agreed, I think his exit is a little bit strong. But I think it's clear that Sunderland are highly unlikely to stand in Bellingham's way if he decides that he does want to move forward. And there's a few different factors to consider in this. The first is that Sunderland are very, very respectful, I think, of the fact that Bellingham had offers on the table from the Premier League last summer. He could have pushed for a move, but he absolutely didn't. It's something he's spoken about in the build-up to Wembley, that he was determined to stay, and he felt he had unfinished business at the club. He wanted to get the club back on its feet after the season it had in his first campaign, where obviously personally there was some really good stuff, but the club ultimately finished 16th. He was determined to almost put things right, if you like, signed a contract extension, rejected that interest from the Premier League, and has gone on to be a big part of Sunderland's campaign. I think there is a respect from Sunderland's perspective for that. There is clearly already a really, really close relationship between Christian Speakman and the Bellingham family. Additional to that, the sort of respect for what he's done this year means I think they would be highly unlikely to stand in his way. It's also a broader point in terms of how you recruit these players as well. We talked about it with Jack Clarke last year, that Jack Clarke had an opportunity to go to Burnley before the bid from Ipswich came in last summer. Again, Sunderland at that time didn't want to sell, didn't sell because didn't think it was the right time. But they didn't want to do that 2 summers in a row. And when the Ipswich came in, they felt it would be wrong to again deny Clarke the opportunity to go to the Premier League. Their talk is always that if you want to sign these players who will have other interests when they come to Sunderland, you've got to demonstrate that you won't stand in their way if their development outstrips the pace of the club's. So nothing is agreed. And the one big thing I would say is Bellingham is under contract until the summer of 2028. So Sunderland will not sell on the cheap. If Jobe Bellingham does go, they will bring in a fee that I think will probably land somewhere between the 24 million for Darren Bent and the 30 million for Jordan Pickford. I don't think it'll be far off a club record sale for Sunderland. So they won't let him go on the cheap, that's for sure. But I think it's highly unlikely they'll stand in his way for all the reasons I've outlined. And at the moment, time will tell. But I think it looks increasingly like Jobe Bellingham will leave. So I've got another question here from SAFC Hippie, who says, how do you think our transfer policy will evolve now we're in the Premier League? We've paid around 20 million for Lefebvre, and he's 25, so older than any player we'd paid a fee for previously under the current plan. Well, I think that Lefebvre's a little bit of an exception in terms of the quality he was able to bring midway through the season, his relationship with Régis Fabrice, and the fact that he clearly has significant resale value, even despite, as you say, him being slightly older and that fee being so significant because of the level I think he's already reached in European football when he was at Lorient. So I do think Lefebvre's a bit of an exceptional circumstance. I don't think Sunderland's transfer policy will change. I think it will, I think the word you use, evolve, is a good one. But I think Sunderland will just see this as another opportunity now, a greater opportunity to invest in more young talent because they'll have deeper pockets. They'll be able to offer the sort of the carrot of Premier League football. But I don't think the strategy is going to change whatsoever. I think the strategy will still be to try and identify the best young talent around the world, to invest in them early, to give them opportunities to develop, to try and sort of boost that long-term sustainability of the football club. The interesting question is whether you need a little bit more Premier League experience in the squad, and that's something we'll find out over the next sort of weeks and months, whether Sunderland feel that way. Think back to that brilliant first season in the Championship where Sunderland really upset sort of the odds and ended up finishing 6th. Yes, it was built around a lot of players who didn't have much Championship experience, a lot of young players, but you did also have those core sort of group of Alex Pritchard, Corey Evans before his ACL in the first half of the season. Danny Bart obviously was the fans' player of the year that year. So I definitely think there'll be a factor of we need to get some Premier League experience in this group, really, just to help the younger players understand what it's all about and to manage what could potentially be a really challenging season. But I don't think the strategy will fundamentally change at all. I think that it'll still be the Sunderland we've become familiar with. It might just be that we're potentially looking at sort of bigger fees and maybe slightly more established young players, if you like. But I think fundamentally it'll be the same Sunderland next year. Matthew says, how do you think RLB will set us up tactically next season? I thought this was a really interesting question because one of the big things that's been talked about over the last few weeks is kind of this idea of, do you really want to go up? Because the gap, not from Sunderland perspective, I mean from Neutral's perspective, we're all desperate for another crack at the Premier League. But clearly the gap between the Championship and the Premier League has grown vastly since Sunderland were last at that level 8 years ago, and it's a definite concern. And I think we're all aware that it could be a really tough year for Sunderland, and I think speaking to a lot of people on Wembley Way and around the sort of weekend, everybody was kind of saying, look, we understand that we might find it difficult next year, but if we were to come back down financially, we'd be in such a strong position now, and that's why it's such a big game. So I think Sunderland fans are quite realistic about it. But there's a couple of things that I just want to end on that give me a little bit of cautious optimism for next year, that maybe Sunderland can compete and can do something potentially a little bit better than some of the other teams who've gone up have. One is that with this being such a young team with so much talent, you just don't know how these players are going to adapt. They are unknown quantities at Premier League level. it might be that some of these players take to it quite quickly. It might be that even if it takes them a little bit of while, they're really able to get to grips with the level and they find that they are capable of playing at that league. Some of the teams that go up, maybe you're looking at players who've already played at that level. We know a little bit more about them. We know that they've struggled to make the jump in the past, and that's why they've sort of ended up back in the Championship. We don't really know that with Sunderland. It might be that a lot of this core of young players find that they can actually adapt to the level, and potentially Sunderland can upset a few people. I think the one point, going back to your question, Matthew, is the other thing that gives me a little bit of confidence with Sunderland is that they're not wedded to a possession-based style of play, which is quite often with what you see with teams who go up to the Premier League. And that means that they kind of struggle when they have to play a different way against teams with, better individuals and more established at the level. I think that Sunderland will try, especially at home, they will try and press, they will try and get the crowd into the game, and they will try and catch teams out. But I think that the fact that they're already quite comfortable defending their box, playing on the break, as we always say, suffering out of possession, I think is something that gives them a little bit of a chance that maybe some of the other teams who go up to that level struggle with, because I think Sunderland are a lot more tactically flexible. And so fingers crossed that's something over the course of the season. Someone can prove a few people wrong and make a really, really good fist of it. So yeah, thank you so much. There's quite a few questions that I haven't got to. It might be that I'm able to come back and do another one later in the week or next week. We'll see how sort of things develop in terms of club news and what have you. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. I thought it was well worth having a bit of a chat about the game, mainly because, as I said, there was a few things about the discussions around the games of Coventry that I just feel like maybe haven't been quite right. And I thought that in terms of Sunderland's performance from kind of pundits and neutrals, and I thought it was worth discussing. I always think it's worth reflecting on a Wembley win, isn't it? And hopefully you've enjoyed some of the sort of transfer chat as well. So keep your eye out on the Sunderland DID website. Just so much content still coming over the next couple of weeks. And yeah, keep your eyes out on this channel as well, because we'll have loads of video content over the summer. As I said, thanks so much for watching.